For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. The 1972 Miami Dolphins are one of the greatest teams in NFL history. And depending on who you ask, they might be the greatest team in NFL history. In the Super Bowl era, they're the only team to ever finish an entire season undefeated, going 17-0 and finishing with a #1 offense and a #1 defense in the league. Of the 22 starters on Miami's team, a whopping 10 of them ended the year with either Pro Bowl or first-team All-Pro honors, and in some cases, like safety Dick Anderson and right guard Larry Little, both. The no-name defense shut out 3 opponents and played one of the greatest schemes in Super Bowl history, which would have been the first and only shutout in Super Bowl history if not for a special teams gaffe by Gary Yepremian. And while everyone knew that Miami was going to be a good team in 1972, especially since they were coming off of an appearance in the Super Bowl the year before, and were led at head coach by the incomparable Don Shula, I don't think anyone realized just how good they would be, because they were historically good, the likes of which we might never see again from a wins and losses standpoint. And look, when you're a good team, especially as the season progresses, and it becomes apparent that you've actually got a shot at doing this and actually going undefeated, the world is going to be watching. All eyeballs are going to be on you, and you're going to get a crap ton of media coverage. Markets that would never have shown your game before are going to show your game. Casual fans who don't know a lot about football are going to tune in and watch you. And it can definitely be overkill depending on the situation that we're talking about. Because in 1972, in the eyes of many angry fans, the Dolphins might have gotten a little too much coverage. Because during week 10 of the season, as the Miami Dolphins were taking on the New York Jets in their quest to keep their undefeated hopes alive, one market in Ohio happened to show that game over another important game. And let's just say that the residents of that area were not even the slightest bit thrilled, especially because of how it came to be. Because this is the story of the controversy in Toledo during the 1972 NFL season, and how the NBC affiliate there, WSPD, screwed a lot of people over. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand the game that I think just about everyone was expecting WSPD to show over there, and why this was a big deal. It's November 19th, 1972, and we find ourselves at Cleveland Municipal Stadium for an AFC Central battle between the Cleveland Browns and the Pittsburgh Steelers, in a fierce rivalry matchup. The Browns and Steelers had played each other many times before, but at the time, this might have been up there with one of the biggest meetings ever between the teams. Pittsburgh entered this game in first place in the division, boasting a 7-2 record, thanks to an offense that was the 3rd best in the conference, and a dominant defense that was 2nd in the conference in points allowed, only behind the Miami Dolphins. Their point differential of +99 was the 2nd best in the AFC, and it seemed at this point like if any team was going to legitimately have a chance at dethroning Miami, it was going to be Pittsburgh, which was on the verge of making it to the playoffs for the first time since 1947, and for just the 2nd time ever. However, they didn't have a ton of room for error, as one game behind them was the Cleveland Browns at 6-3. After a disappointing start to the season, where they were 2-3 and played disappointing football, the Browns were starting to pick things up again, having entered this game on a 4-game winning streak, reinserting themselves back into the playoff picture. Granted, they didn't exactly beat good teams during that 4-game winning streak, as they beat the Broncos, Chargers, and Oilers twice, 4 teams with a record of 7-28-1 if we count the Oilers twice. Still, you can only beat who's on your schedule, and this was a statement game for the Browns to show that they were for real, and if they could win this, they'd put themselves in first place in the division, and would set themselves up nicely for home field advantage throughout the playoffs, since the postseason sites were predetermined by division back then. They did not go by record. And what we got in this fierce rivalry game was an incredible, down-to-the-wire installment where the Browns came out on top at the last second. On a cold, muddy day in Cleveland, the Browns pulled off the upset, and won it at the last second on a 26-yard field goal by Don Cockcroft. It wasn't pretty by any means. The Browns had a commanding 20-3 lead at one point in the first half, and it looked for sure like they were going to hold on and prevail. But the Steelers scored 24 of the next 27 points to take a lead late in the fourth quarter before the Browns kicked the game-winning field goal to hold on at the last second. Still, a win is a win, and even if it wasn't pretty, it was Cleveland's fifth straight, as they went from a below 500 team near the midway point of the season to first place in the division, controlling their own destiny for a playoff spot and the AFC Central title with 4 games to go. So you would think that the people throughout Ohio would be celebrating, right? You would think that Browns fans across the state would be celebrating a monumental win to get them into first place in the tightly contested AFC Central. And you'd especially think that this would be true in Toledo, where the Browns have a massive following, and might be the most popular team in the city. It's less than a 2-hour drive to get from Toledo to Cleveland, with the two teams separated by less than 120 miles. So it makes sense as to why the Browns would have a large following there. Now, there was a rule back in 1972 that blacked out home games regardless of what the attendance was. The 1972 season was the last season with these antiquated blackout rules. However, while this applied in Cleveland, meaning that the only way you could watch the game in Cleveland is if you were actually at the stadium, it did not apply outside of the 75-mile radius of Cleveland, meaning that Toledo, much like they had done all season, could watch this game unfold on their television sets. And this was a big deal, because many fans that wanted to watch their team play, but lived in the city of that team, and couldn't get a ticket, went to these neighboring cities like Toledo to watch the game. They'd book motels, or they'd travel to a bar, and they'd watch the game over there. Basically, a lot of people were expecting to be able to watch this game right here, and were expecting to watch the nail-biting affair between the Browns and the Steelers. And don't just take my word for it, the TV guide said the same exact thing. If you lived in Toledo, or any of the surrounding cities in that media market, which was the 80th largest market in the country, you were getting this game. Right there, it says that Channel 13, WSPD, was going to get the game. It wasn't just that TV schedule saying that, it was this one as well. Advertising clear as day that on NBC, you were watching the biggest game of the season and the battle for first place in the AFC Central between the Browns and the Steelers. Based on everything I could find, WSPD televised every single Browns game that they held the rights to, as this was Browns territory from an AFC standpoint. And this game was no different. At least, it should have been no different. Because when viewers turned on their TV sets at 1 o'clock and flipped on NBC, they didn't get that thrilling Browns-Steelers game. Instead, they got this game right here, as in the AFC East battle between the Miami Dolphins and the New York Jets. Now, don't get me wrong, this was a big game in its own right. Obviously, the Dolphins entered the game at 9-0, so there was the obvious storyline and angle there with regards to whether they could keep their undefeated season alive, or whether someone would dethrone them before the start of the playoffs. However, the New York Jets were also a really good team, as they entered the game at 6-3 and as winners of 4 of their last 5. No, the Jets couldn't win the division by this point, barring an absolute miracle, but they were tied with the Cleveland Browns entering the week for the lone wildcard spot in the AFC. So this game had intrigue besides the obvious angle of, will the Dolphins lose? And this game was a thrilling affair, so it's not as though people in Toledo who turned on NBC were treated to a boring contest. The Dolphins trailed this one 24-21 through 3 quarters, and there was genuine concern as to whether the Jets would finally be the team to deliver the blemish in Miami's season. However, the Dolphins prevailed by a final score of 28-24 on a late 14-yard touchdown run by Mercury Morris, capping off a double-digit comeback from 1 point in the second quarter. Having said that, this was very clearly not the game that people in Toledo were expecting to get. Not by any stretch of the imagination. Number 1, the Browns were the local team and were the dominant team in the area, and now people wouldn't be able to watch them. Number 2, The Browns were playing a meaningful game for first place in the division. It was the biggest game they had all season, and one of the biggest games in the NFL up until that point. So it's not as though the Browns were 2-7 and out of the playoff hunt. Neutral fans were interested, much like Browns fans were. Number 3, it's not as though you could even make the argument that people in Toledo hadn't gotten a chance to watch the Dolphins yet, because the following week, they were on Monday Night Football in a nationally televised game against the St. Louis Cardinals, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. This situation is almost like if the Arizona Cardinals were playing a game in Week 12 for first place in the NFC West against the Seattle Seahawks. The Washington Commanders were undefeated entering their game, both teams were playing at 4:25 Eastern, and the Fox affiliate in Tucson decided to show the Commanders game. Doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. In fact, it's even worse than that, because number 4, and perhaps the big one, WSPD lied about what game they were showing. All week, they advertised that they were going to show the game between the Browns and the Steelers. Every TV guide said that. Every commercial said that. All week, they made it seem like at 1 o'clock on Sunday, November 19th, you were going to be able to watch your Browns play and have a chance at first place in the division. And then, at the last minute, with no notice whatsoever, the game became this. It became something else entirely, leaving Browns fans in the area completely confused and completely in the dark. You want to watch the Browns play? Too bad. You'll have to go to your nearest radio and find the game and listen to it that way, or find some bar that can rig some sort of signal. And to say that people were outraged about this would be putting it lightly. Amazingly enough, and I don't know why, WSPD didn't even issue a statement for why this happened. They didn't say it was a call from the higher-ups in New York, that there was an error with the feed, so it would have been fuzzy, so they decided to run the clearer game, or that they got phone calls when the game was announced that said they wanted to watch the Dolphins instead. WSPD did not face the music. All we do know is that when 1 o'clock hit, all of the lines for WSPD were busy, meaning that a bunch of people had angrily called into the station to ask where the Browns game was and why they lied, to the point where no one could get through and everything was jammed, which is always a good sign. However, not that I think WSPD would have even done it, because it seemed like from all indications like it was their call, but because NFL rules mandate that once the game starts, it can't be switched off unless certain criteria are hit from a competitive standpoint, and the Jets-Dolphins game was always close and within 17 points, the game could not be switched off. If you were a Browns fan in Toledo on this day, you were straight out of luck. What stinks about the situation involving these 4 teams behind me right here is that 2 weeks later, WSPD would show the Cleveland Browns take on the Pittsburgh Steelers, as the teams met at Three Rivers Stadium in another important battle for the AFC Central. And even though they showed that game was terrible. The Browns lost that one 30-0. It was a disaster, and they only put up 126 yards of total offense. Why couldn't it be flipped? Why couldn't WSPD show the Browns-Steelers game that people wanted to see, and the actual good game, and not show the one that was awful? I'm sure there would have been a lot less complaints if they didn't show the 30-0 game versus the game they won the last second. As a side note, I did say that the Browns beat the Steelers in that game on a last-second field goal by Don Cockcroft. Well, I've got his helmet right here. And I did say that the Dolphins beat the Jets on a fourth-quarter touchdown by Mercury Morris. I've got his helmet right here. Let's just say this controversy with these two teams, not the last time Browns fans would hate the Dolphins in 1972, I'll tell you that much. The Miami Dolphins in 1972 were a team that took the entire country by storm, even taking over territories that would usually show their hometown team, even if they were good. WSPD made a massive mistake here, not just by not showing the Browns, but by refusing to advertise the switch, by lying to their viewers, and then by refusing to face the music and issue a statement, as if that was common practice for that to occur, when, spoiler alert, it was not. Because if Browns fans wanted to watch their team play on this November day in 1972, and take over first place in the AFC Central for the time being? Too bad. They were stuck with this scheme between the Dolphins and the Jets. The running joke is that Jets is an acronym for Just End the Season. But on this day in 1972, when Browns fans had to watch the Jets instead of their own team, and when it came to the decision that WSPD made, and the deception that WSPD pulled, Jets stood for Just Exterminate the Station. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.